So let's talk about Trump letting the country default. What? I just listened to the Young Turks um, explore what would happen if the United States defaulted. Right? If the United States defaulted. It's like it's a contradiction in terms. It can't happen, right? It's impossible. And my immediate response is, okay, so you're making the standard right-wing error of confusing personal debt with government debt. Do you see what's happening here? And it's the truth. The Young Turks, in this response, they don't sound like anything different than I would expect coming from a Fox News panel. And I don't mean that in the Fox News of the left sense. I mean that in a Fox News sense. Their concept, their understanding of economics, is comparable to something you would hear from Bill O'Reilly, right? And you know that because you listen to them talk about it during the fiscal crisis, quote unquote, and all the other things that come up with this. And what it is it's the conflation of personal debt with government debt. They don't understand, or conservatives, broadly speaking, really have a hard time understanding that government can just make as much money as it wants. That government debt isn't actually debt, right? The government isn't in debt to anybody except itself, right? I was talking a little bit about modern monetary theory recently, and it does kind of tie into that, right? Um, there's no, they shouldn't even call it government debt, right? Because it's not debt. They should call it like the sum amount of money that exists, right? Um, so the entire discussion, and they're talking about interest rates and investors divesting, and it's all just a lot of nonsense, right? In fact, they even talked about the fiscal cliff, about what would happen if the whole thing is just political theater. It's just and it really um, demonstrated the ignorance of the panelists, right? Or the willingness of the panelists to talk utter nonsense to generate an audience. One of those two things, right? It's the classic, you guys are ignorant or you're stupid. Um, one of these two things, right? But then I read the article, okay, and in fact, the article makes a lot of sense. Um, what the article points out is the point that the panelists at the Young Turks didn't understand, and which you would normally associate with um, uh, right-wing analyses, either demagogues that understand the truth and just push nonsense, or um, people that have actually like people that legitimately don't understand the difference between government debt and personal debt, right? But the article does point out that the United States cannot actually default unless it does so on purpose, okay? Which is a correction of the error that the right-wing demagogues were pushing through as political theater in the fiscal cliff non-issue, and it was a non-issue, okay? But it doesn't change the fact that this is something that Trump can't actually do. In order for Trump to default on the United States non-debt, um, like the Senate would have to do this, right? You can't just do this through executive order, right? Um, because you're dealing with all kinds of agencies that actually operate independent of it. It's even if he wanted to do it, he couldn't. Okay, so his claim that he can default on sovereign debt is about as ridiculous as promising a peace dividend of unicorns. The correct conclusion from Yglesias in the article is that what exposes is just like Trump doesn't have a clue what he's saying, right? And that's, the article was actually pretty much spot on. It's really scary that you've got somebody running for office that thinks the government is a business, right? I think that's kind of been a lot of his pitch, though, and I think that's what a lot of people that's what a lot of his support is based on. That you need to run government like a business. My dad used to say that all the time, and I tried to explain it to him, and he just didn't listen. He used to say that you need to run government like a business. In fact, who actually used to say that all the time too was Bill Clinton, right? So it's not like this is from nowhere kind of thing. I think there's actually kind of a popular perception the government should be run like business. It's based on massive levels of ignorance or massive levels of demagoguery, or maybe a little bit of both. But it's very widespread. Okay. And Yglesias is absolutely correct to point out that it's scary that somebody that reflects the ignorance of. See, I pointed. If you go way back, I pointed this out when Trump first started running. I was talking more about his understanding of terrorism, right? Or the conflicts in the Middle East in general. His comments indicated that he just didn't have a clue what was going on, right? But it was worse than that. What his comments indicated was that he was getting his information from the same sources of propaganda that his audience was, right? It's not just like he uses. A lot of people have pointed out that a big reason why Bush was successful was probably because he sounded like his audience, right? And it is, I believe, well known that it's a fake accent for what it's worth. Okay, but he sounded like them. He used the same expressions that they use. He's one of them, right? So there's that level of identity politics there, right? With Trump, it goes to a different level because it seems like Trump is getting his information from the same sources. Like it's not that Trump is pretending to be one of them, right? And using that. It's that Trump actually is one of them. Okay, he's rich, but he's basically white trash, right? He's very wealthy white trash. The way he thinks like white trash, he acts like white trash, and so the responses of things that you're getting from him are often the same responses you would get from white trash because that's what he actually is. When he talks about terrorism, he sounds like the white trash that he is, and that's what we're getting here, I think. Oh, he's corrected himself, but he always does that, right? He says something stupid and then he backtracks on it, right? The confusion between government debt and personal debt is something that the Republican Party has gone to great lengths to cement, right? I mean, I'm pointing this out. You've got some, so-called left-wing analysts here sounding like a bunch of right-wing idiots. And I think they believe what they're saying, right? Because they've gone to such great lengths to push it down that it is widely believed, and the confusion is widespread. They push it. They push it through their politics. They push it through the media, any vector that they can, right? Because it upholds their fiscal policies. If you can default on debt, then you have to reduce spending, right? And there's your argument for reducing spending on Social Security, healthcare. Because if you don't spend money So if you spend too much money on these things, then the government will go bankrupt. Just like you would go bankrupt if you spent too much money. And they rely on that confusion. It's incredibly important, right? Which does open up the possibility that Trump is basically fucking with you, right? That what he's really doing is he's trying to enforce that confusion. He really knows what's going on. He understands it, but he's just pushing the same Republican line that you've heard forever. Except I've never heard anybody actually take it to that point, right? They tell us that we're out of money, which is ridiculous. Because you can't be out of money when you make your own money, right? So they tell us that we're out of money and we have to cut things. But they don't say that we're going to default on the debt that doesn't actually exist, right? So I do think that Yglesias is actually correct, that it does expose total ignorance rather than absolute demagoguery, because nobody takes it to that level, right? But the Young Turks, on the other hand, were really truly just parroting the same stupid right-wing scaremongering you hear from the demagogues on the right on a fairly regular basis, right? They missed the point of the article. And so my initial response, which was actually about the the spectrum shifting, right? It was about, wait a second, you guys sound like a bunch of conservatives in your fiscal analysis. You're making the common error that the Republicans consistently make accidentally on purpose. Do you see what's happening here? Right? The left is being pushed into the right, and the right is, they're switching sides. But after reading the article, it's actually more clear that they just didn't understand the article. And the scenario does not just expose the incredible ignorance of Donald Trump, but it also exposes the incredible ignorance of the panel at the Young Turks.